This is beautiful Lake Michigan. And this is Lake Michigan viewed through my camera. Look what I got. This is an HDMI recorder, and I've wanted one of these for a long time, but they are rather expensive, so it was hard to justify. But recently I found this one. It's relatively cheap. It's a little bit clunky and plasticky, but it works. And now I can show you yet another perspective, what I'm seeing when I'm composing in camera. So you'll see plenty of examples in this video footage from my camera, and I'm hoping that is helpful for you to see what I'm trying to do out there. But now let's go back to Lake Michigan. I love doing photography around Lake Michigan because you can find very strange and odd things like this structure in the Warren Dunes in Waco Beach. I immediately knew that I wanted to take a long exposure of that structure. I went with a 20mm lens to show a lot of context and to show that vastness of Lake Michigan and to show that structure a little bit in isolation. The hard part was to decide where to place the structure. In the middle of the frame felt a little bit boring. A better option would be on the bottom, but that day the sky was kind of plain and uninteresting, so I went with the placing the structure on the 1/3, on the top 1/3 of the frame, showing a lot of water in the foreground, transitions from darker to lighter tones. I created that with a linear gradient on the bottom, and I added another one to the top to make that sky just slightly more interesting. It's a very subtle effect, but it is there. That one was the first and pretty much only normal image I took that day, and by normal I mean my high contrast imagery that I usually make. I don't know if it was the light, the landscape, my mood, but I felt like the way to go that day was a high key, low contrast images, and that's what I did for pretty much the rest of the day. I tried to do that with this fence right here. I love these fences in the snow because of the contrast that they create in between those, darker tones of the fence and the white snow. I didn't have snow this day, but by brightening the sand, I could create a very similar effect, and that's what I tried to do here. I was trying to shoot with a 20mm lens, wide open, to have just the parts of the fence that were closer to me in sharp focus, while the rest of the fence was gradually disappearing in the background. And I actually like the result. As I said, you can find very strange things in Lake Michigan, but this part of the shore is pretty barren when it comes to finding stuff in the water. There wasn't much happening on this beach, and finding a subject was pretty hard. That's why I kept trying with the fences. In this case, you see how I was trying to contrast that darker pole, darker stick on the bottom left of the frame with the tree trunks in the background on the top right. Nothing amazing, but you gotta try, right? When you don't have clear subjects, you have to pay closer attention. You have to look for the tiny details in the landscape. That's how I found this weed right here. It didn't look like much at first, but with a little bit of work, both in the field and later on editing, I think it turned out to be one of my favorite images of that day. I took the first shots at 1.4, but notice how I had to change to 2.8 because it was a little bit too much, and even then only a little part, a tiny part of that weed is in focus. Everything else is slightly out of focus, but I quite like that effect. The sun wants to come out now. It's not that sunny weather of the summer where we have that harsh light. It's a very low contrast sunny weather, if that makes any sense. And I don't necessarily dislike that. I think it goes very well with the low contrast, high key images that I'm trying to make here. We'll see if I can find something else using those shadows that this new light is creating. This one is going to be another one for my collection of signs. I have quite the collection now. I checked the other day, more than 500. I might be approaching the moment where I can actually do something with them. I don't know if it's going to be a book or just a collection online or something, but for now I'm just gonna keep taking photos of them like I've been doing with every other photo today. Wide angle lens to make the sign look much bigger than the rest of the landscape. Wide aperture to isolate it. Okay, I'm gonna get a longer lens out. I might be able to get something from here. Even though this might not seem like a great vista, it is pretty great for this part of the country. It's pretty flat around here, so these hills, these dunes offer a chance to have a higher view. Another thing I got recently is this lens. I've been thinking about getting it for months. I think I mentioned it in a video from Norway. I'm considering getting a 135 1.8 to replace this one. There was a very good deal a few days ago. I got it for, I think, yes, slightly over 600 bucks. So I pulled the trigger immediately. I only got to use it for a few times now, but I absolutely love the images that this lens is able to produce. And I used it for a few images this day, and you'll see some of them in this video. In any case, this lens was not long enough to photograph those fences right there in the distance. So I had to switch to my beloved zoom lens. If I get the zoom lens, the 28-200 in APS-C mode, that should give me around 300 millimeters. Still not, probably not enough. This is what's great about this lens. Look, it goes from this wide perspective to this. This is 200 millimeters, and now this is APS-C mode at 300 millimeters. It's much better, but still not enough for what I wanted to do. I could crop even more in post, but I know that the image didn't really work. So I moved on to making a long exposure of the same structure I was photographing earlier, but from farther away. It looks like I got stuck at that spot. This time it was the shadow that the handrail was creating on the wooden path. I loved it. Even though I prefer a cloudy day, I loved that soft light that was creating some shadows, as you can see, but they were not harsh. It was not a harsh light. It was very subtle and very soft. I first tried with the 85mm, but it was way too much, way too tight. Okay, I'm switching from the 85 to 35. Should emphasize what's closer to us. So I might have to switch even to a wider angle lens. Even though this is cool, I like a lot the shadow here on the stairs. Okay, gonna try the 20. Let's see if this lens emphasizes even more those shadows. Focus there. I think that's kind of cool. I like soft light, I like subtle, because it gives me the freedom to do whatever I want with the image. In this case, I wanted to decrease the overall contrast of the image while retaining that darker shadow. So after making the photograph a high-key, low-contrast one, I created a mask by using a brush to select the shadow of that handrail and then darkening it just a little bit, enough to make that shadow more visible, to make it the main point of the image of the frame. Here, the same story. I was fascinated by the shadow, and again, I worked on it in Lightroom. Yes, it takes a while. Polishing your images requires some effort after the fact. I'm not sure why there is this romanticized idea of photography where everything has to be made in camera. Well, in fact, most of the masters of photography did and do spend as much time in the darkroom or the computer now as they did in the field. That's a topic for a different day though. I actually like these images even though they are not my best, but again, you gotta try. I'm still glad that I found something that made me wonder and that I was able to create something with that. I worked on more composition before leaving Waco Beach. It was getting pretty busy, lots of cars in the parking lot, lots of people walking around, and I don't like to leave my video camera behind recording me in these kind of situations, so I only have footage from the monitor from here on. By the way, it's really raining outside, so if you hear a noise, that's what it is. It's a storm coming, I think. Anyway, the show must go on. The first image I made was with the 135mm lens of this tree, and I want to say a trash can. Not sure. By the way, I thought about it for a little bit, but I went for it. I got rid of that trash can in post. I won't even apologize about it. I wasn't able to find a good angle, a good composition of that scene, of what I was trying to do without including that trash can, I guess, in the frame. So as I said, I went for it because it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. I'm not hiding it from you. I'm not lying. I'm not harming anyone by doing this. This is art. This is not journalism. So there's that. Anyway, the idea here was this one. I liked how the tree was leaning to the left, but there are no branches coming out of that tree. And at the same time, we have those branches coming from the right side. So it kind of looks like the tree disappears on the left and it appears on the right. It probably doesn't make any sense to you, but it does to me. In fact, I've done this composition before. Look at this shot I made in Italy several years ago of a couple of birds. I decided to crop it this way, so the head on the left would complete the headless body on the right. It's the same idea. I think it works better on the image of the birds, but still. Let's keep going more with the 20mm this time. These two trees, a pretty simple composition. Here I went for something more normal to me, high contrast image, not a high key image. So I wanted to contrast the two trees. To do so, I shot it wide open at 1.4 and then used a brush to darken the tree in the background. The bark on the tree in the foreground has plenty of detail, and that's where your eyes go to first. Then you notice the one in the background.
Sorry, but there's a tornado coming.
It looks like there's a tornado coming towards us, so I'm gonna have to finish this really quick, or maybe later. I kept walking on that parking lot because I was loving those trees, but first I stopped really quick to make an image of yet another sign. I tried to contrast these two trees here again, but I don't think the image works as well. All those little branches make the thing much more chaotic than I really like. I did find a lone tree that worked much better, and hey, this editing was pretty straightforward. There's some crazy weather happening out there right now. We thought a tornado was coming our way, but so far false alarm. So where was I? Oh yeah, I finally left Waco Beach behind and I started to head back home. I had plenty of time though, so I stopped by New Buffalo. That's one of my favorite spots in the southern part of the lake, especially in winter. There's always something interesting to photograph over there. One of them is this lighthouse. It's a very tiny lighthouse, but I think it looks awesome. Okay. Hopefully you can see it. There is a very cool tree there that I'm gonna capture with the 135, of course. Nice. Again, as with the Lighthouse, I am trying different options by raising the camera and getting it lower so I show more or less or nothing of the lake, and that changes the image quite a little bit. One thing I did with this image is to use a linear gradient on the bottom of the frame to get rid of all the details in the grass while still retaining some of the texture. To do this, I decreased the clarity, I increased the haze. As you can see, the effect is pretty visible and I quite like the final result. Here I'm trying to show a little bit of the sky because those clouds are kind of cool. Something like that. So it's kind of like a sandwich where the tree is in the middle while the clouds and the grass create the top and bottom layers. It's cool. This is the border right here between the public and the private beach, but you bet I'm gonna take a photo of that sign. Hopefully showing the houses in the background. All right. I've been trying to find that isolated weed here that could look good, similar to what I did back in the Warren Dunes, farther north from here, but these dunes are much busier when it comes to weed, so it's gonna be harder. So this one right here is the best one I've found so far. I really like the shapes in the sand. Hopefully I can get a clean shot. This is what with the 20. I'm not sure if I was tired or if I couldn't see clearly on the monitor, but all the shots of this scene were out of focus. You can see how the camera was focusing on the sand, but I totally missed that. Anyway, I think the image is actually nice with the weed just slightly out of focus. And that was pretty much it for the day. I tried more compositions, but really nothing worth sharing here. All in all, it was a pretty fun day at the lake. I got to use the recorder, I got to use the new lens, and I think I made a couple of images that will grow on me over time. I hope you liked the images and you enjoyed the video. It was a little bit different this time, but I'm trying different things. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.